What is a remittance tax, and why would Adam Smith be rolling in his grave if he heard we were going to be bringing it to the table in 2025? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, yes, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So if you want to learn more about how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while, yes, improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode. Or if you're curious, just go ahead, scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, which stands for The Brian Nichols Show. But with that being said, let's jump into today's conversation. Remittance taxes. What? What is a remittance tax? I don't want to go ahead and explain it to you today because I have an expert on the show. Braden Myers is going to join us. Braden, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me, Brian. It's a privilege to be here.
Absolutely, man. I'm looking forward to digging into remittance taxes, which I know everybody is listening saying, oh, I've heard about those. Probably not. For being honest, right? There's so many taxes that are out there. Everybody's just like, yeah, whatever. The government's going to get their nuts. So they're going to tax me in some way, shape, or form. But we're going to dig into remittance taxes. But before we do that, do us a favor, Braden. Introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience. And why is it that you're so focused on this special little tax that we're going to be digging into today?
Yes, so I'm Braden Myers. I'm a student at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, studying economics, philosophy, and history. Obviously, when you hear that credential list, you think, oh, philosophy students have a reputation for having reality-grounded arguments and whatnot. So to add a little bit more qualification to that, I've also worked very extensively in the DC tax policy space, as extensively as I can as a full-time student. So I'm super involved in this, and having an interdisciplinary background, I see tax policy from an angle of both what is efficient, but also what is a good message we want to be sending, what is a good normative side of these things. And I think on both of those measures, this remittance tax that we're going to be discussing today fails.
Well, and you wrote an article over at the National Review talking about why Adam Smith will be rolling in his grave, basically, at the idea of a remittance tax. So let's just kind of set the stage here. What is a remittance tax, and why would one of those economic thinkers in Adam Smith be so upset with it?
Yeah, so the remittance tax is, a tax on remittances. So obviously we're going to have to explore what exactly a remittance is. A remittance is a typically small amount of money sent from people in this country who are typically not originally from this country back home to another country. These come in the form of cash transfers, money orders, or just physically sending cash in a box somewhere. These are about $250 average. That's what the research says. And they're going abroad to families, friends, and people who are dependent on someone's labor in America. Now, I'm not sure what you refer to it as, the OB3, the OBBBA, whatever it is.
That one big beautiful bill.
Yeah, which is now the One Big Beautiful Act, which isn't actually called any of that at all. It's a whole thing. But there is a particular provision in there that imposes a 1% tax on any of these transfers going abroad. Now, normally these transfers come from Western Union, which is a company that specializes in these types of things. So the transfer tax would likely be on them. But what we also see, again, a lot of this cash is flowing abroad through other means. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that this tax is going to raise about $1 billion per year over the next 10 years. For reference, remittances are about $200 billion leaving the U.S. So you can do the math on that. A 1% tax on $2 billion leaving the U.S. This isn't predicted to be a very efficient tax. It's not predicted to be very good at actually capturing what we want to capture.
So at first blush, Braden, and let's just set the stage here, because I know 90% of the audience is probably listening to this saying, well, 1% of 200 billion. I mean, that's not I mean, it's not a big number, but it's not insignificant, right? And I'm sure lots of folks are saying, well, doesn't it kind of stand to reason that the money that they're earning in America should, I don't know, stay here? If it's not, then at the very least, America should get its nut for giving them the opportunity to, create this wealth in the first place. So just kind of help set the stage here. Where are those folks getting things wrong, or are they on the right path?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things to note there. First, I reference again that this probably is not going to be very effective at raising revenue. The original provision had a 5% tax on remittances, and then it was cut to, I believe it was 3.5, and finally to 1%. So again, this is not actually, it seems to be about the percentage of wealth raising. The tax foundation estimates that this is going to be incredibly difficult to comply to for many of these companies that focus on remittances. And there's a good chance that it costs more to administer than it's actually bringing in its revenue. So first of all, this is not going to be effective at raising revenue. But the second thing, and you referenced the argument that the government should get its fair share, and absolutely it should, but the money that people are receiving in America is the same whether you are a citizen or non-citizen, right? You are paying your income tax, you're paying your sales tax on things you're buying here. If you have property, you're paying property taxes. You are paying the same taxes as an American. Now, if we have an issue with international immigrants who are not paying income taxes, sales taxes, whatnot, that is a problem we need to address with our income tax and sales taxes code. But we should not be penalizing people who are trying to send money abroad with the assumption that it has already been taxed and the government is already getting their fair share of it. And the final fear, which you discussed, which is largely the focus of my article, is the idea that money leaving America weakens America. And this is something that Adam Smith discussed very much in detail. He called it foolish, and he thought it was frankly an awful idea because, as it turns out, money serves us as a store of value and a medium of exchange, but having a lot of money in our vaults isn't good unless we want to, host dragons to curl up on our piles of coins and whatnot.
Do you not have one of those?
I don't personally have a dragon. No, maybe the Treasury has someone that I haven't seen, but
in their Gringotts bank there.
Right, exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm a millennial. I have to make some Harry Potter reference, of course.
No, I appreciate the Harry Potter reference too. But of course, this idea of mercantilism, which is the idea that the key premise of mercantilism, as has been discussed by many scholars at the time, is that we need to have a large reserve, largely of gold and silver, which was the primary currency they were discussing in the 16 and 1700s. We need to keep that reserve so we can build armies and participate in this economic statecraft. Now, the most important thing about mercantilism at the time was it wasn't particularly a unified economic agenda. It was more of a list of talking points and maxioms that policymakers could use. It was not founded in economic theory, and many criticisms say that it's just weak economics, plain and simple.
So, weak economics aside, I'm wondering if the argument from yesteryear is, while kind of same church, a little different pew, right? And here's why, right? Because back when it was more of this mercantilist, say that 10 times fast perspective, it wasn't the folks from America who were necessarily being, I'm using the word replaced very loosely, but replaced from these mercantilists, but rather it was the mercantilists who were doing some type of job that Americans by and large weren't, right? And then they were bringing the money back home, versus today, the conversation is more along the lines of, we have folks who are here illegally, and we saw 20 million plus flood the border in a 4-year period from the turn of the decade, right, from 2020 onward to end of Biden's administration. And those folks are under the radar, right? So they're already avoiding a lot of those other taxes, to your point. But then they are, by and large, actually replacing the American citizens who would normally do those jobs because they're undercutting the market, the labor costs. Because now, if I'm a business owner, I have to compare and contrast Billy or Jorge. Billy's going to cost me a lot more in terms of having to pay because of all the extra, like the taxes and fees I have to pay as a business owner, and they have to pay, right? Versus just under the table sub minimum wage, like pay Jorge, and Jorge's gonna pay his expenses here in America, but then he's gonna send all that home. I think that's the difference in the argument today, Braden. What do you think to that? If you're a new parent, you already know the feeling. Running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, chasing your kid before the coffee kicks in, it's like you're constantly in survival mode. And even if you do find time to eat clean or sneak in a workout, your body's just not operating at full speed. Stress, sleepless nights, and poor nutrition tank your nitric oxide levels, leaving you sluggish, foggy, and unfortunately snapping at the people you love the most. And trust me, I've been there. That's why I started using Cardio Miracle. That's a clean nitric oxide blend that supports energy, circulation, and mood with no caffeine crashes or stimulants. Just ingredients like organic beetroot, CoQ10, and L-arginine that naturally help you stay present, productive, and powered through parenthood. Trust me, this stuff helps you show up for your family. So, scan the little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to give it a try. And by the way, when you go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, you're going to get a discount automatically applied at checkout. Just look for the little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols at the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
Absolutely. That's a major concern. And my stance on immigration, I'm generally a fan of supporting immigration, but that's not really what this remittance tax is about, right? Okay. We have immigration policies, and even if I disagree with them, even if some people agree with them, some people disagree with them, they are very valid policy discussions that we need to have open dialogues about. That is completely essential. But the remittance tax is non-discriminate on citizens and non-citizens. It is, frankly, completely random. The objectives aren't super clear, right? Again, it's on citizens and non-citizens. All we're doing is taxing cash being sent abroad. Now,
really quick, I guess in that spirit, that if it was just a focus on non-citizens, does that kind of address the underlying issue?
It addresses part of the underlying issue, which is the indiscriminateness of this tax, right? But more so, it's a question in America, is the labor of non-citizens invalid to that of citizens? It's a question of, if I have deemed that your value to me is greater than the value of my cash, do I, as an American employer, not have a right to pay you that and then allow you to do with that what you will? But I think the larger point of that argument is taxing non-citizens should not be a matter of if they are sending this money abroad, right? If there's a non-citizen who brings their entire family here and uses the money to support them under this law, we are perfectly fine with that, right? I mean, that seems like it almost goes against what immigration would say, right? We're going to what anti-immigration arguments would say. We are going to encourage people to bring their entire family into the United States because if they're leaving their family back at home, they're going to get taxed on it. So first of all, I think that's a contradiction in the argument. Again, I fully support people welcoming families here and whatnot. I think that's an important part of the American psyche. But again, I think this remittance tax is encouraging all the wrong behaviors. And more so, you talk about under the table payments to, undercut the hardworking, but more importantly, tax paying, right? Like, Americans are willing to bite down and grit their teeth and work hard for a wage. That's never been our problem, right? We have a culture of hard work. Where we're getting undercut is obviously by people who aren't paying taxes and are making a comparatively higher wage to us while using the same services as that. And again, that is an issue for our domestic tax policy, but we absolutely should not be discouraging people from sending money to their families back home.
Is there an argument, though, that money that's being sent back home would better be leveraged and spent here in America, right? And I think back to, I grew up in New York State, and we have the SUNY school systems, right? And what the SUNY school systems do is they will actually, and I know this is not unique to the New York SUNY school systems, but like they will give better rates for in-state tuition than out-of-state tuition. And the idea there is that if we're going to, as a state, fund these public universities, we want to keep the people who are in this state in the state. We don't want little Johnny who just graduated college to go down to the University of Alabama, right? When he can just go to SUNY Potsdam or SUNY Geneseo and get his education in New York State. And then the idea being is that, well, little Johnny will probably stay in New York State. He'll, become a taxpayer in New York State. He'll start, maybe build a business in New York State, start a family in New York State. Now, you're spot on. The other side of the domestic policy issues, especially when you go to the state level, like there's a reason that even though I grew up in New York State, I don't live there anymore, right? Because it's so gosh darn expensive. Also, the winters, -40 degrees. No thanks. I'm a cold-blooded person, but like my goodness, when you talk about Alabama versus like -40, I might take Alabama, but I digress. That logic at least tracks, right? Like the idea of trying to place a carrot in front of the horse to drive the horse forward, like, A plus B should equal C in this mentality. But going back to my original question, if that money, instead of if the states are, and I know you're saying that we should have the domestic tax policy thing, but I'm more so saying what is versus what should be. If where we are today, though, is that the states, the localities are creating these financial carrots to help drive some type of action or inaction. And that is being taken by folks who don't live here, right? And then being sent overseas. I could absolutely see from a nativist, nationalist, protectionist perspective that this is violating kind of like the inherent deal that was being made of saying, hey, we will help fund all these different areas with the understanding that you're going to stay here and keep things kind of local, right? So I guess in that mentality, like, is there at least some merit to that argument, despite the fact, I hear you, that we need to address the tax policy issues, but like just looking specifically in this use case of non-citizens who are taking either those American jobs, but also taking the benefits from a tax perspective or from a handouts perspective, right? A welfare perspective, and then sending pieces of whatever they've earned overseas. Is there any argument that you see there that actually holds some water?
I most certainly think there is an argument that holds water. You obviously referenced the public university system in New York, and New York City obviously has a strong system as well. And I think in all of those cases, while there's a validity to saying, hey, you live in this state, we want to keep you in this state so you can have a lower rate. I think it's also true that people who live in the state have been paying taxes in the state and have been funding those education systems, right? And if we were failing to tax half of the state to fund those educational institutes, I would say that is a big issue. But I would not say that the issue is all of the people who are coming in to exploit those public institutions. And, the spoiler alert, at the University of Alabama, I am a student who's on scholarship from out of state, right? So I understand that sweetening the pot is what can draw in ideally good people. I like to think I'm a good person for Alabama, good students, but their goal is to draw in people who are hard workers. And I think that should be America's goal too, right? If people are willing to work hard and help us dominate the new world order and compete in the global economy. Yeah, I know.
Is that Klaus Schwab behind you, Braden? I thought maybe.
Oh, it might be. I haven't looked behind me in a while. But the point of that is we are ever trying to stay competitive. And when we're telling people that they cannot use their money the way they want to, that is naturally going to disincentivize them earning money, and in doing so, disincentivize their labor. Now, as for the welfare issue, again, I think it's important that we are taxing domestically. And I think the best way to ensure that we are taxing properly domestically is to create easier paths to citizenships, because obviously it's easier to track the tax burdens of American citizens than non-citizens, right? So I think that is our way of expanding the base and earning more revenue. But I don't think that taxing money, again, we aren't even trying to tax non-citizens spending money, right? We are very particularly claiming a right to it because it is leaving American borders. And frankly, those dollars leaving American borders have as little impact as on our economy as someone hiding cash under a mattress, right? It's a different form of saving, but money is the blood that is flowing through the global economy. And America, yes, sorry.
No. I'm the one who was interrupting, so I apologize. I just wanted to maybe compare and contrast. You tell me where this logic falls off the tracks, right? So, like, I used to weigh 385 pounds back in the day. I was a big boy. And let's just say, for example, and this isn't true, but let's just pretend that I had heart disease and diabetes, and I had a bad knee. I do have a bad knee, by the way. Thank you, football. But like all these different issues that I could look to say, well, that's why I'm a fatty, right? Because I have all these problems, and I could say, well, this is life, right? I have all these issues. I can't deal with them. And instead of saying, well, start somewhere, right? Like start eating less, start trying to walk, start trying to drink more water and cut soda out. Like you got to start somewhere, right? And I'm wondering, is there any argument, Braden, of saying, well, listen, this isn't going to solve the problem, just like solving one of those areas wouldn't have helped me lose 1 million pounds overnight. But like, is there at least an argument to say, well, this remittance tax is not meant to be the magical wand that makes everything all happy and butterflies and rainbows, but rather it is just a means to start somewhere?
It most certainly is. And I'd like to be clear that, this will have some marginal effect on immigration, I'd expect, right? If your goal is to discourage people who want to come in here and earn money, we will in some way have that effect. But I would argue that this juice is not worth the squeeze. We are taxing generosity. We are taxing people sending money back to their family, to people who are most in need of it. So there are a lot of places.
Really quick, is that our issue to be concerned with? Like, and hear me out, right? Like, again, Jorge, his family might be not doing so great in Mexico, but like Billy's family might not be doing so great in America. And this is where I think I'm not saying you're doing this, but we've seen a lot of folks use this empathy argument as almost a weapon, right? Like, well, we can't do this because this could lead to, Jorge's family over in Mexico not getting what they need to survive. Like a lot of Americans are saying, dude, I don't care about Jorge's family. I care about my family and like my community. Like I live in the Midwest, right? And we live in this area where it was very much like automobile manufacturing kind of area. And as NAFTA comes into place, we see jobs just flood out of the area. There's a lot of folks who I know for a fact would be like, I could give 2 flying flips about Jorge, and if his family is getting the $250 a month that they need to survive, when I'm seeing literal like people on the streets in my community barely able to survive here, people that I can see, touch, smell, taste. I don't want to, right? I think that's the argument, though. If you're a business owner, do you ever open your phone bill and feel like you need a decoder ring? Regulatory recovery fee, support access surcharges, platform licensing.
Half the stuff on there is just made up jargon for we felt like charging you more, and here it is. And don't worry, other folks are over it too. And that's why I am recommending you level 365. They're upfront, no hidden fees, no surprise line items, no gains. You pay what you agreed to. Period. And if you need help, a real human answers the phone. Clean pricing, real support. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but here we are.
Yes, and that's absolutely a concern. I mean, I am a believer that the obligation of a state is to its citizens before anything else, right? I believe through the philosophy and history of it, I believe that the government has a fundamental obligation to serve every interest of its people before it has the rest of the world. But again, I point back, we can talk about principle, and it's very important that our arguments are based in principle, but we can also talk about the actual implementation of these things. And the truth of the matter is, if our goal is to serve American citizens, there are so many other ways to do it. I mean, the bill came with a SALT cap that's going to increase expenses by some $200 billion. There are so many frivolous
state and local taxes, just for
state and local tax
game.
cap increase. But that's a whole episode in itself for you, I'm sure. If you get the chance to talk about that, you should. It's fascinating. But what we are targeting here is not something that is going to effectively serve the American people. And more so, you use the word empathy, which I think is super important. Going back to Adam Smith, which is who I, of course, mentioned in the article. Adam Smith, as many people know, wrote The Wealth of Nations, but he was also a moral philosopher based around the concept of the individual. And he believed, as many people on the right do, that it is individual drivers that can be a positive forward movement for the market and for society in general, right? He believed that individual self-interest could be good. But most importantly, he had a broad definition of individual self-interest, which included what he termed empathy, which is nowadays probably something we would call more sympathy, but he called it as a mix in between the judgment of values and what we feel as a raw emotional sympathy. And that is a requirement for a civil society, is to have this empathy. So the idea that we are going to build a government where people who are working here, again, some of them are legal, some of them are not, but there are a lot of legal citizens sending remittances home too, right? The idea that we are going to tax everyone based on their empathy is an attack on the fundamental underpinnings of our society.
And when I say weaponized empathy, right, I'm more so using it of people who will say, like, for example, we talk about the government handouts, right? Like, well, if you cut these Medicaid handouts that, or not Medicaid, I guess it is Medicaid, like, or not Medicaid, SNAP. That's what I was going to SNAP. It's they're all handouts, but like the SNAP handouts, right? Like, oh, you're trying to cut out the ability for people to get chips and soda. Well, you're just you don't care about these people, right? It's like, no, this is tax dollars that are taken from the American taxpayer and then leveraged to do good, right? And I think this is where so many folks have just gotten burnt out, Braden, is like the idea that if we want our money used more efficiently and effectively, that makes you a bad person. And I think what you're seeing here today is that a lot of folks kind of they blend these two worlds together, right? But to your point, it is very much not a black and white, but very many shades of gray here. Now the challenge is how, from a sales perspective, do you make the case, right? Because I think, it's fair to say the average person that I'm kind of outlining who's like, I don't care about Jorge, right? They could hear this argument today from a facts and figure standpoint and be like, yep, that tracks, but still don't care, right? So like we have to be able to make an emotional appeal on the other side, just as the folks with the weaponized empathy use emotion to make their arguments. So if you had to help Billy, right, in the Midwest, hear what you're saying and say like, yep, I get it, and I'm on board. Like, what would be your sales pitch?
Yes, absolutely. And I also care more about, in your example, I care more about Billy than Jorge, right? Like, I think, again, we're assuming a lot of things about Jorge. That Billy is my priority, right? Billy, the American citizen, the taxpayer who needs these systems and is losing a job and all of these sorts of things. And I think I am a believer in fair competition. And I believe that the solution, or at least a presentable solution to Billy's problem, is not just to attack Jorge sending money across our borders, right? It is to treat Jorge the same as any US citizen, right? Make him compete on the same grounds, paying the same taxes with the same labor safety requirements, all of the things that have made the American system largely so successful, right?
Here's Billy, though. He's going to say, well, yes, Braden, I hear that. However, Jorge shouldn't be here to begin with.
I mean, if Jorge's shouldn't be here to begin with, that's most certainly notable. But the fact is, Jorge is here, right? If you want to get rid of Jorge, that's a entirely different argument, right?
Got like Tom Homan on speed dial.
Right, exactly, right? If you have a problem with that, there are so many other ways to do it than saying we're going to slightly restrict Jorge's ability to send money home to his family. And as I mentioned earlier, those are legitimate discussions that are important and that we need to have on both sides. But again, I am talking about a very narrow remittance tax that even if we applied every single burden, you could call it a burden, every single tax burden that we put on the American onto Jorge, we are then tipping the playing field away from Jorge, and that is hurting our entire economy, right? Not allowing laborers to compete for wages drives the market into chaos. And I mean, we've seen these protectionist regimes time and time again through history that say, hey, we are going to pay our workers this set wage, right? It's the same driver behind many minimum wage, many socialist arguments is that, hey, we are going to set this fixed wage because our citizens inherently deserve that. But I don't think that's what has made America successful. And I don't think that's what Americans want, because when Americans compete, we fight and we win. We are successful. We have a culture of hard work that has been largely built through our immigrant history, right? But regardless of our history right here and right now, I am confident we are some of the hardest working peoples on the planet. And I think we can compete with Jorge any way we can. And if Jorge is beating Americans, I say, let him be an American, right? That's the kind of person we want, and there is room in our economy. And again, if we don't have room in our economy, if we're having problems with jobs, that is not a problem for the remittance tax to fit, right? We do things daily that are restricting jobs, that are hurting the economy, many of which are protectionist, with the idea of, protecting American steel. Or, I mean, you can go back to the 1920s when we're looking at protecting American shipbuilding. And we see the consequences down the line, which is that when we protect, we are driving jobs out of sectors where there would be competition, destroying, American shipbuilding. I'll come back to again through the Jones Act, because there's been a lot of discussion about the Jones Act recently. Our shipbuilding industry is frankly in shambles. It cost us something like 7 times as much as a competing nation to build a ship. And that is because we have a requirement that is protecting American workers from competing by the likes of Jorge or anyone else abroad. So the truth of the matter is, if we want to protect the interest of American, we let people compete as Americans.
And I think, for my final thoughts here today, Braden, like in my perspective, government should not be adding more loopholes or more barriers, but rather get the existing barriers out of the way, right? Like there's a lot of things that I've definitely critiqued the Trump administration for, but there's areas I will cheer and I will celebrate. And that is one of the areas being that we've really seen a big push towards deregulation. And I think that's a good thing, right? We go back to the, the Supreme Court ruling, Chevron deference, there we go, last year. And I mean, that opening the door for Congress to, reclaim some of their authority, to channel my inner South Park, because that's top of mind right now. But like Congress now can actually put in place the rules or get rid of these nonsensical rules without having to defer to some government bureaucracy that responds to nobody. And the fact that we're seeing the value of American deregulation because it now gives us more flexibility to do things in a truly free market, more proper manner. It opens the door for more positive, tangible outcomes. Now, with that being said, I also think we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's one thing to say we need to open the barriers and make it so it's easier for businesses to function properly in a true free market perspective. But I also think we have to be able to understand the sales and marketing side, like that. The dollars and cents side is more the facts and figures. The emotional side, though, is when people do see the very real examples of someone who is here illegally, be that, and again, we're not arguing the merits of illegal immigration today, but if somebody definitionally is here illegally and they are getting paid by an American entity and that pay is lower relative to what Billy would get paid, because the illegal immigrant is bypassing all of the other loopholes that are already in place, or not loopholes, the barriers in place, like income tax, sales tax, property tax, go through the list. Like, I would understand that Billy would be resentful, right? And it's not trying to excuse away protectionist and nativist mentalities, but rather we have to understand why these mentalities exist. And it's not because Billy isn't being productive. It's not because Billy isn't as as valuable as Jorge is when it comes to a one-to-one comparison, but because quite literally Billy is having to compete in a marathon against Jorge with a 70-pound bag on his back, right? And that is, I think, where most folks who are listening to today's conversation mentally are. They just see it as we have unfair burdens put on like true American citizens who are just trying to make it through the day and make it through the week, make it through the month. And then you have folks who not only are able to do that because they don't have the extra burden, but they have enough to send money overseas, right? That is the narrative. That is the mentality that a lot of folks rightfully or wrongfully have. And we can't just say, well, that's not how it should. Here's how we should do it. We have to like meet them where they are and understand like this is what's driving this mentality. And we have to be able to address that piece first because, guess what? Billy can vote, right? And if Billy's going to be able to vote, then we have to be ready to be prepared for the consequences of Billy not being heard. And I mean, you go back to NAFTA. I'm a free trade guy, but when you see literally like hundreds of American businesses leave America and go to our neighbors to the south or neighbors to the north, because it is more cost effective for them as a business. And that's not even looking at corporate taxes, right? But just from an employee standpoint, to get cheaper labor, cheaper goods, it makes it very difficult for people in America to see value because now they're saying, sure, I got, pardon my language, we got a lot more cheap shit, right? But I can't afford that cheap shit. So help us get some of these jobs back. And I think it starts again with just that one-to-one comparison of Billy versus Jorge, which, by the way, Billy and Jorge, if you're listening to today, sorry that you become the focal point. But with that being said, Braden, I think that would be kind of my final thoughts, not from a facts and figures, stats and such, but rather just the emotional side of things, because at the end of the day, emotions sell, right? Like we approach everything here in the show of a sales and marketing perspective because we're either, selling an idea, remittance tax proposal, or against that, where we're trying to sell our politics. So we have to understand why people make buying decisions. And we can't just, hope that we show them the numbers and they'll understand. we have to make sure we're always tying back to the emotional implications here. So that's kind of my final thoughts for today. Braden, bring us home. What are your final thoughts, and what would you like folks to take away from today's conversation?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, to address your point, you use the metaphor of running a marathon with a 70-pound weight on our backs, right? And I think the truth of the matter is Americans want to run that marathon every day, right? We compete and we win. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but we want to compete fairly. And I think in the case of a remittance tax, that's just not making the marathon fair, right? The way to make that marathon fair is to either make sure that Jorge also has a 70 pounds weight on his back, or to make sure that our Billy doesn't have a 70-pound weight on his back, right? And that is fair competition, and that is where markets thrive. That is where jobs are created. That's where incomes rise. It's the same thing with NAFTA, right? We see issues not of competition, but of fair competition. When we take that away, we lose a lot, and we're taking away Americans' opportunity to race at all. But the solution is not a remittance tax. That's what I'd like people to take away from that.
Good stuff. Braden, do us a favor, bring us home. Where can folks go ahead, follow you if they want to learn more, continue the conversation, and also check out your article there over at National Review?
So I can mostly be found on LinkedIn. That's where I
you're
post
muted
most
there.
of my articles. Oh, am I? I shouldn't be. Can you hear me?
Weird. The feds got you.
It's like they did. It says my microphone's working.
Can you hear me now? There we go. Now we can hear you. We're good.
That's weird. It said my microphone was working that whole time. I'm not sure what it was. But they can mainly find me on LinkedIn. That's where I post most of my articles. I'd love to have a discussion in my GMs, and if you're lucky, I'll give you my email or something so we can have a real conversation. And then I'm looking into starting a Twitter page at that point, or X, whatever it's called at this point. So when that happens, I'll probably announce it on my LinkedIn, but that'll be the place to find me. And it's just Braden Myers.
Braden Myers, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for telling us why Adam Smith is currently rolling in his grave with the idea of a remittance tax. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show for Braden Myers. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.